While retirement is generally seen as a time of relaxation and self-focus, God calls us to love, serve, and help others for a lifetime. He has been preparing us for this retirement season, literally our entire lives. In retirement, countless Christians enter a state of spiritual dormancy, not knowing how they are called to have an impact for God's kingdom. The Retirement Reformation seeks to encourage and empower the 50 million Christians approaching or in retirement to embrace the calling God has been preparing in them. When the world says it's time to stop, you can begin to have your greatest impact. Welcome to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation, where our goal is to journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him.
Reaching out to the 50 million Christ followers in America who are approaching or already in retirement, you've tuned into I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. I'm your host, Jim Brangenberg, along with the founder of the Retirement Reformation, Bruce Brynsma. He's here joining us today. We invite you to check us out online, retirementreformation.org, retirementreformation.org. And of course, on the Apple Podcast Store, the Apple App Store, get our app, Retirement Reformation, and you can listen to I Retire for Him in the Apple Podcast Store. You know, the concept and reality of retirement in the United States is a rare social construct. The ability and the assumed right to be non-productive and still retain full social status in society is an American thing. Work is a way of providing for life expenses, and retirement leisure is the extended right that should be available for all and supported by society. That's what we think. Each person is also uniquely responsible for managing their retirement years. While retirement is represented to be a time divorced from financial and social stress, it is in fact the most complex time of life and is reported to be not for sissies. For the Christian, it's even more complex time, and Christ followers are impacted by the culture and challenged by Jesus' commands. Today we start a series exploring culture's impact on how we live in retirement. Today, and the other Christian worldview of living in retirement. We're going to compare the two and contrast. We'll be releasing this podcast series every other week. When we do, we will give you what you need to know and how you can respond as Christ followers who affirm, I retire for Him. Here to work through this whole cultural impact on retirement is Bruce Brynsma, again at retirementreformation.org. Bruce, welcome back to I Retire for Him.
Always good to be here. And for those of you that are seeing this visually, you'll see beyond what is my right-hand shoulder some balloons, and it says 80 on them. Well, it's not because it's our 80th podcast. We're approaching that. We got a little ways to go yet. But in fact, my own personal podcast has now reached 80 years. And so it's good to be able to be at a point in time when we can be active, when we can be impactful, when we can be passionate, and when we can make a difference. So let's get on with this cultural conversation, Jim, and see how we can help 50 million Christ followers to make a difference.
Bruce, I want to start off with a story. I'm going to call this the parable of the South American fisherman. A boat docked in a tiny Mexican village. An American tourist complimented the Mexican fisherman on the quality of his fish and asked how long it took him to catch them. Not very long, answered the guy. But then, why didn't you stay out longer and catch more, asked the American. The Mexican explained that his small catch was sufficient to meet his needs and those of his family. The American asked, but what do you do with the rest of your time? I sleep late, fish a little, play with the children, and take a siesta with my wife. In the evenings, I go into the village to see my friends, have a few drinks, play the guitar, and sing a few songs. I have a full life. The American interrupted. I have an MBA from Harvard, and I can help you. You should start by fishing longer every day. You can then sell the extra fish you catch with the extra revenue. You can buy a bigger boat. And after that, the man asked, with the extra money the larger boat will bring, you could buy a second one and a third one, and so on until you have an entire fleet of trawlers. And instead of selling your fish to a middleman, you can then negotiate directly with the processing plants and maybe even open your own plant. You could then leave this little village and move to Mexico City, Los Angeles, or even New York City. From there, you could direct your huge new enterprise. How long will that take? Asked the man. 20, perhaps 25 years, replied the American. And after that? Afterwards, my friend, that's when it gets really interesting, answered the American, laughing. When your business gets really big, you can start buying and selling stocks and make millions. Millions? Really? And after that, asked the guy from Mexico. After that, you'll be able to retire, live in a tiny village near the coast, sleep late, play with your children, catch a few fish, take a siesta with your wife, and spend your evenings drinking and enjoying a few friends. Bruce, that's what's wrong with so much of culture in America today.
Well, that idea, both of the South American fisherman, he was a product of the culture in which he was surrounded, where he was born, the friends that he has, the city that he's in, the trade that he learned, the family that he grew. That culture created his way of thinking. And in his way of thinking, that was the best culture. Now we've got our Harvard guy, and he was raised in a totally different culture. He was raised perhaps in the culture of New York City, the fast pace, the aggressive spirit, the what it is that we need to do. And he thinks that that culture is what is right, not only for him, but for everybody else, as your story so clearly illustrates. When we put it into that kind of a contrast, Jim, we just have to chuckle, don't we, for the disparity, and that perhaps the way that we respond to cultural issues comes full circle.
Yeah,
and that, in fact, we really maybe don't understand the impact of culture on the decisions that we make.
But, Bruce, so much of our time is spent in preparing for retirement so we can sit back, relax by the coast, and enjoy our time with our family. And so I think the guy from South America, this fisherman from Mexico, I think he understood some things that we all could use to understand. So much of us spend so much of our time killing ourselves and ignoring those things that are precious to us that when we get to retirement, many of those relationships are often damaged, which is a cultural thing in America. And when we actually have time to go and enjoy all the money that we've made, the people that we want to spend it with often don't want to spend it with us. So how do we fix this? It just seems like there's an awful big twist in the American idea of retirement and work even.
Well, one of the things is the cultural environments that we find ourselves and our ability to both understand them and to put them in a context. So now when you say put them in a context, and I don't care if you're in the context of the Mexican fisherman or the guy from New York, there's a context that I would even suggest that perhaps both of them are missing. And that context is God's context in our lives and what it is that he has prepared us to do to be able to impact the kingdom. If we would write a story, if we continue with the story that you told, and you told it so well, but we put into it and we added into it, what is it that the fisherman could do in that context that would help build the kingdom? And I'm sure we could find all kinds of ways that had both his story, his life experience, his family, the resources that he has can be applied in those ways. In the same way, the guy from New York, if in fact his only focus is money, possessions, so that he can sometime do nothing, then in fact he is not connected with God's meaning for his life. And so when we put God into the middle of all of this, it then changes not only the application, but our understanding of the meaning of the culture where we find ourselves.
Bruce, when we come back, I want to dig a little bit deeper in this. Of course, our next segment, we're going to be interviewing somebody who's got a story to tell. One of my friends, Bill Porcher, is going to join us on the show today and just share a little bit of his retirement story. But when we come back in segment 3, Bruce, I really want to dig deeper into this and where we're going to take this next series of podcasts. It may be 5, 6, 7 podcasts where we talk about the culture and retirement. And I'm excited to hear your perspective, because your perspective as an 80-year-old guy and me as a 55-year-old guy, we're going to have some different perspectives, and I think it's going to be fun to hash them out. You're listening to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. We'll be right back.
The Retirement Reformation wants to come alongside you as you navigate in each stage of your retirement. Our online resources include our blog, our downloadable books, and life planning studies, as well as membership and coaching options. Go to retirementreformation.org and use these resources to begin the transformation of your retirement. Journey from retirement to reformation, so you can say, I retire for Him. That's retirementreformation.org. Now, back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to iRetire4Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation. I'm Jim Brangenberg, your co-host. And today we're going to be talking every second segment of the iRetire4Him podcast, we bring on somebody who's retired, who's got a little story to tell. This is my friend Bill Borchert. He lives in Fort Myers, Florida, and he's got a story to tell. Now, his retirement story is still developing, but he's got a doozy of one, maybe a little blip that he's had in his life in the last couple of months. Bill Borchert, welcome to iRetire4Him.
Well, thank you, Jim. I appreciate the time and look forward to talking to you guys.
All right, so you retired. How many years ago did you retire?
It'll be 6 years ago.
When you retire, you've been a believer for a long time, right?
I have. I was baptized in 2006, but that was just a recommitment to Jesus Christ.
So when you retired, what did you expect retirement to throw your way?
Oh, boy. Well, same thing as the nation talks about is relaxation and doing things that I haven't done before, maybe a little bit of travel, and just seeing people and taking it easy, right?
Okay, now I've known you now for a little over 2 years. You're hardly a guy that takes it easy. You like to play golf, and you like to play tennis, and you like to ride your bike. I know you love to eat food, and I also know you like to go fishing. So you really thought that retirement was going to be all about those kinds of things, right?
I did. And I pretty much did all of those things. Absolutely.
Now, when you met me, I started to challenge you on some of that stuff, didn't I?
You did. You were a new wheel. You're a new cog in the wheel for sure.
Or a new thorn in your flesh. Whatever.
Either way.
All right. So talk to me about that. So we've had a lot of conversations about your retirement and what God's got in plan for your retirement. What has God said to you? And am I challenging you? What has God said to you in response to, hey, Jim's, being a little thorn in your flesh?
Well, essentially what's kind of happened is I've looked at my life and it's like, okay, here I am, I'm retired. I can play tennis, and nowadays I can play tennis for maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. So there is about 16 hours in a day that I'm awake and walking. So I have another 14 hours to fill. So what am I going to do with those 14 hours? And I haven't really decided what I'm going to do with those 14 hours, to be completely honest with you. But I am looking around. Jesus has kind of, and you as well, have kind of made me think consciously about my time and what I do with my time and where I should be and who should I impact. Now, my ears have become a lot more sensitive to conversations with regard to somebody brings up church or somebody brings up spirituality or somebody brings up anything like that, or Sunday morning. If somebody says they're out playing golf on Sunday morning, I'll say, do you guys ever go to church? I'm just a little bit more intentional about my faith now that I'm retired. I have more time. When I was working, I didn't consciously push God out of my life, but I worked very hard, and God wasn't the center of my life. He was more one of the spokes, and probably my occupation and trying to earn a living and keeping people happy was probably one of my main goals. And that's one of the reasons why I mentioned to you earlier, Jim, that I was baptized again in 2006. I was brought up in a Christian home, but I was baptized in 2006 at 57 years old, and it was just a recommitment to my faith.
So retirement's been good to you. You've gotten to play a lot of golf. You've gotten to ride your bike a lot. You've gotten to play some tennis. You've had a couple of knee problems. You got a little bit of a hip problem, but in the last couple of months, God got your attention even more, didn't he?
Yes, he did. Well, I was out playing tennis, and for some reason, I had a little stomach ache. Well, that stomach ache, after a couple of days, turned into a real heart attack on a Saturday. I played tennis on a Tuesday. I had indigestion on a Tuesday. Wednesday, I didn't have it. Thursday, I had a little bit. But then Saturday morning, I played tennis, and at the end of my tennis round, I had terrible indigestion, went home. Karen, my wife, gave me, her care and loving care, gave me a Prilosec and some Tums. That didn't work. And I felt pain in my jaw. And I said, I think we got to go to the hospital. This might be a heart attack, which is very amazing to me. We're still trying to get through that because I eat right, and as Jim said, I do a lot of exercise, and I've never had a problem with cholesterol.
You're a healthy guy. You're a healthy guy. You eat right, you exercise. That'll teach you.
Where does that come from? So I was predisposed to, I guess, plaque in my arteries. So my faith got me through that. I can honestly say when I was in the hospital on Saturday night, thinking I was going to go to the cath lab on Sunday morning. And it was like, you're going to either have an angioplasty, you're going to have stents, or you're going to have open heart surgery. And I'm thinking, and I was just praying. I was just praying to God that, well, if it's time to go, it's time to go. I didn't have fear, which is it's amazing to me. And I've had people ask me about, what did you think? How do you feel now? And I told him, I said, you must really been afraid. I said, no, I really wasn't. And that's kind of a testament to my faith. And I think it's a testament, if you will, to people I speak to or talk to about that.
So you've had a heart attack. You were a healthy guy. That's what I think is hilarious. I drink Mountain Dew, eat desserts. You exercise all day long. You're the one with a heart attack. So far,
I'm older than you.
Okay, that's true. I haven't had near as much time to plaque my arteries as you have.
There you go.
But God's got you thinking again. I mean, you had some serious conversations with God as you're waiting for that stent surgery, which you had not one, not two, but how many stents?
Four.
4 stents.
Four stents and 3 arteries.
So it would have been a triple bypass surgery if they hadn't gotten much further. But thank God he saved your life. How did it shift your perspective as you look at retirement? Now you got a different perspective. Like, okay, wow, okay, you could have died. God's not done with you yet, Bill. What's he got for you?
Well, what it did is I never really thought about my mortality, and I think that's part of my. I don't know if I want to say it's part of my faith or it's part of my I don't want to say ignorance, but just a situation where I haven't thought about mortality. And as a younger person, you don't think of that. As you get older, you might think about that. But when you have a heart attack, you start to think about that and you just say, wow, here I am in the hospital. This might be it. I might be going up to see Jesus. And again, I'm faithful for my faith and faithful for that promise. But so now I understand that I don't have 60 years left on this earth. And surprisingly, I finished reading a little blurb by
Francis Chan. Yep.
Francis Chan. And it was about hell and how real hell is. And he kind of said, if I believe in hell, how can I continue the way I continue and just let my friends have that in their future? And after my heart attack, I started thinking about that. Like, wow, I got these people here. I'm in a retirement community down here in Fort Myers, Florida. There's a lot of people that are older than I am and closer to the grave than I am, maybe. So, yeah. So it's got me thinking a lot more about mortality, about heaven and earth, and about just being open to people and speaking clearly about my faith.
Wow, it's definitely a paradigm shifter, and I'm just grateful you shared your story. Like I said at the beginning of the segment, I mean, your story's not done. It's being written, but it's active and it's changing, and God is using you. And I know you've got a heart and passion for mentorship. I just hope that one day you'll be able to pour your life into the next generations in multiple ways. Bill Borchert, thanks for sharing a little bit of story. This little paradigm shifting, this heart attack got my attention story. Bill Borchert, thanks for appearing right here on I Retire for Him.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate the time.
We'll be right back with more on I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece for the retirement reformation.
It's time we stop looking at our retirement years as 30 years of vacation, leisure, and self-gratification. Let's take control of our retirement life plan and build meaning, purpose, and intentionality into it. Go to retirementreformation.org and click on the word manifesto. We invite you to make a retirement declaration to yourself and to God. Sign the manifesto and start changing the way you think about retirement. retirementreformation.org. Click on Manifesto. Journey from retirement to reformation, so you can say, I retire for Him. Now let's get back to the show.
Hey, welcome back to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece for the retirement reformation, as we start a brand new series of really talking about culture and retirement. And this is our kickoff to that series. I hope you enjoyed Bill's story that we shared, my buddy Bill. And this is going to be a multi-week series. We don't even know how many weeks it's going to take us to get to it, but just a reminder, we're going to release podcasts every other week during this series. Bruce, we got different cultural perspectives. We got 25 years between the two of us. Talk to me about, get some stories, some examples of this friction between culture and retirement and really the biblical Christian perspective on retirement?
Well, we got a big topic, and who knows how many weeks it'll take us to unpack it, but I really do believe that it's an important topic. So this morning I was talking to Judy about what it is that we are going to be doing in this podcast series. And for those of you that don't know, if you check my last name, it ends in SMA, and that means it's Dutch. And not only is it Dutch, but it means it comes from a part of the Netherlands called Friesland. And my wife's maiden name was Hepkema, and her family came from there too. There are some interesting characteristics, cultural characteristics, that identify people from that part of the world. And while our grandfathers came to the United States, the pieces of that culture that stayed really with us were ones of hard work, and that hard work brings the value. Well, there's nobody that I know, and I just turned 80. Judy's 81, and there's nobody that I know that is more intentional about her work and what it is that she needs to get done every single day when I'm leaving the house to go to work at age 80, than Judy. And so I said to her this morning, I said, why is it that you are so focused on this work ethic? Where does that come from? Well, she was kind of quiet for a longer time than I'm used to her being quiet. And she finally said, well, isn't that what the Bible says? And yeah, we just need to work hard. I said, wow, that's kind of interesting. So where do you think that came from? So what did your parents, if I was your mom and dad were here, and I asked them the question, what would they say? She said, well, I think they would pretty much say the same thing. It's in the Bible, and it's just what, as Dutchmen, that's just what we do. We work. I said, wow. I said, so what do you think their parents would have said? She said, well, I think they would have said the same thing. And so whether in fact you're living in a small home in Friesland in the middle of the cow country up there, or you're in the United States, the cultural impact plays itself out in everything that Judy does. So when people say, well, doesn't she get tired of you going to work? I said, well, I'm not quite sure, because she wouldn't be able to work as much if I were home. And I think she really enjoys that. Well, okay. There's a personal family illustration of that work ethic and where it comes from. Now, people will ask me when I've hit age 80, and they will say, well, when are you going to retire? Well, what do they mean by that question? What they mean is, when are you going to stop going to the office? When are you going to stop working? When is leisure going to be a priority for you?
Right.
Rather than all the things that you do? And my answer to that is this. I'm already retired. I'm already doing what it is that God has designed me to do in the place that He designed me to do it, with the people who He designed me to do it with. And that's the best definition of retirement that I can come to. Now, with that having been said, at 1 o'clock tomorrow morning, as I mentioned earlier, Judy and I are getting on a plane. We're going to Miami for 5 days. We're going to eat some good food. We're going to enjoy the beach and have a little bit of leisure. On the other hand, 30 years of that would not work. So there's a context of the way that I kind of come at this whole issue of culture and retirement.
Now, Bruce, also, because you're from Friesland and really are Dutch, you should probably wear some sunscreen when you're in Miami. Just want to make sure. I actually have spent some days. I actually spent almost a week of my life in Friesland when I was in high school, and still have a good friend from a town in Friesland. It's an incredible area, more known for canals than cow country, but I suppose there's canals and cow country there. But one of the things that's also really notable about the people from that part of the Netherlands is the stubbornness that goes along with it. They don't give up easily. And I see that in you too. And so I love the fact that, you're giving a little pushback. What are you going to do when you retire, Bruce? I am retired. I am doing what I want to do. I am in my next phase of life. And you just say, okay, just challenge me on it. You just dare. I double dog dare you to challenge me on this, is what you say to people. So I love that. Bruce, what's the problem with 30 years of leisure? What's the problem with adopting the American view of the American cultural view on retirement? What is the issue there for Christ followers here in America?
Let me take an initial shot at answering that question. And in our next podcast, we'll dig into that a little bit deeper to help our listeners to kind of have a context for them to maybe sit back in their chair leisurely and think about the issues and their lives. So that the question really is, how did we get as a culture today in a certain part of America to be able to think that leisure for a lifetime was a good thing? And it is an American construct. In the introduction, you mentioned that it's a uniquely American construct, although the whole idea of retirement came out of an economic necessity in the late 1800s in Germany, where in fact they had too many young men and too many older men that were still working. And so the head of the government trying to figure out, how do I deal with this political economic problem of finding some more jobs for these guys? So it came up with a brilliant idea. Well, if I can get these older guys to retire, that will open up the positions for.
Yeah, it's right. It'll open up positions for those younger guys. And look where that really led them. Because in Germany, they put a whole bunch of guys idle and a bunch of idle minds. What happens with idle minds? Then we had World War I, and we had World War II. Maybe retirement led to both those world wars. There's something you never thought of from a cultural perspective. Bet you never thought about that.
Well, Jim, you know what we call that? We call that the unintended consequences.
Right.
Of a supposedly good deed that was designed to answer a problem, and the net result was they created a whole series of new ones. And so that's where we find ourselves in the United States today. In 1936, when Social Security was introduced, you know what the life expectancy was?
Yeah, less than 60.
So if you began taking your retirement income at 65 and you're going to die at 62 or 61, the problem's not too tough economically.
That's why they kept stealing from the fund. They didn't figure people were going to live very long.
Well, now we're living for 30 years more, and who knows how long that fund will last and what the implications are. But that implications of living for 30 years has economic implications, has people implications, political implications, economic implications, and spiritual implications.
Well, and that's really where we want to go with this series, isn't it, Bruce? We want to talk about the spiritual implications of addressing retirement and the contrasting American dream of retirement and what Jesus would rather us do with these years we may call phase 3 of life or the next phase of life. But the American dream of retirement really doesn't apply to Christ followers because God's got so much more for us in these retirement years. Bruce, I can't wait till our next podcast. Make sure you guys stay tuned to I Retire for Him as we launch out a podcast series of the culture and retirement, that friction between the American dream of retirement and Christians' view of retirement, and as Jesus followers, what that should look like. Bruce Brynsma, thanks for being on I Retire for Him today.
My pleasure as always, and I'm looking forward to not only the next podcast, but the ones after that as we unpack this really complex issue.
You've been listening to I Retire for Him, the mouthpiece for the Retirement Reformation, with your host, Jim Brangenberg, and of course, Retirement Reformation's own founder, Bruce Brynsma. We're Christ followers, journeying from retirement to reformation, so we can ultimately say, I retire for Him.
Thanks for listening to I Retire for Him, with your hosts, Jim and Martha Brangenberg, and Retirement Reformation founder, Bruce Brynsma. I Retire for Him is the mouthpiece of the Retirement Reformation. Most Christians tend to follow the world's pattern of rest and self-pampering during retirement. However, in your retirement, you can be focused on God's unique call to love, serve, and help others. This can be your best season of life if you take advantage of a life's worth of knowledge and experience and combine it with a greater freedom of time and money and invest it all in the generations both preceding and following you. The Retirement Reformation is encouraging Christians to find and follow God's call in all seasons and aspects of life, especially in retirement. Take time to sign the manifesto at retirementreformation.org and explore the wealth of resources available on our site. Join this movement of God and journey from retirement to reformation so you can say, I retire for Him. Go to retirementreformation.org.